Hello, welcome in the press conference of TAP Coalition. It's about meat and dairy taxes in high-income countries that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40%. And my name is Jeroom Remmers from the True Animal Protein Price Coalition. So I'll start with telling about the need for such policy changes and why we have to pay for greenhouse gas emission taxes, who is starting, which countries are already considering to do it, and what are other options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from food and farming. So my background is from an organization based in the Netherlands, but we work at global level and at European level. And we have 60 partners from different groups. It can be farmers, food companies, NGOs. And we represent 0.6 million people. So what do? We commission reports on true pricing and fiscal incentives and do policy advocacy at EU Commission level and in EU countries. Campaigns like the carbon pricing food campaign last year. And we launched projects to have actually the higher prices implemented, for instance, in catering. So we represent the majority of consumers in West European countries. This was shown by consumer surveys, where we asked if people would be willing to pay a higher price for meat if in the same time these tax revenues can be used to pay farmers to reduce emissions and to reduce food prices for healthy and sustainable food products like vegetables and fruits, while also compensating low-income groups. And then it shows that a large majority of consumers support these proposals, even from right-wing political parties. So we also asked them if they would support a zero VAT rate on vegetables and fruits and a high VAT rate of 20% or more on meat products, and 70% of people in France, Germany and the Netherlands support it. So why do we need a tax? It's not a very popular topic, but I think it's very important to realize the Paris climate goals. So food is responsible for, on average, 33% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And so reducing those emissions is really important to be in line with the Paris climate goals. And if we would do so, we can in the same time reverse biodiversity laws and deforestation, for instance, coming from soy plantations in South America. We can realize the methane pledge, which is also for livestock. And of course, we can help also with public health benefits, because if people in rich countries would eat less meat according to dietary guidelines, then people will live better and healthcare costs can be reduced. Meat consumption was growing in the past 20 years for nearly 60%. And it is expected that it will continue to grow fast. This is, of course, one of the reasons of increasing populations, but also that people also in low-income countries are starting to eat more meat. But here you see how this is predicted for 2050. So, for instance, chicken meat consumption will even double. But this is a real problem for the world, because in 2016, meat and dairy consumption contributed to 14% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but the share of this will grow in the future, and in 2050, 80% of all greenhouse gas emissions will be from meat and dairy alone, if business as usual is growing. So you see here that lamb and beef are the food products with the highest climate footprint, but also cheese and pork are really a problem. In Europe, the EU Court of Auditors published a report showing that 80% of carbon footprints of foods in the EU diet are from two products, meat and dairy. So if we are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from food and farming systems, we really have to reduce meat and dairy production and consumption. Meat and dairy and eggs cause 20% now at this moment of global greenhouse gas emissions. This was shown in a report last year of Illinois University. And this is equal to all greenhouse gas emissions from USA and Russia combined. Eating less meat and dairy can really reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 3 to 6 gigaton CO2 emissions. So changing diets towards less meat and more plant-based proteins is a very important solution also for the closing the emission gap of 2030, which is still 20 gigaton. Another reason to eat less meat is because of public health, and we don't eat enough vegetables. So eating more vegetables and plant-based meat and dairy is also very important for our health. So the solution would be price corrections mainly to make healthy and sustainable food the most affordable choice. So taxing meat and dairy and VAT tax reductions and subsidies for healthy food products. This year there was a report published by Oxford University about a CO2 tax and environmental taxes on meat products in high-income countries. And this shows that for beef products, for instance, if all environmental pollution would be paid the price, the true price, then the tax would be $5 to $9 US per kilogram beef, for instance. If only greenhouse gas emissions would be taxed, this would also be very high, like nearly $6 US or euros per kilogram beef. So this is actually what is the price of meat. It's causing a lot of pollution and deforestation loss, and we all have to pay a price for it. Maybe not here, but later and in other places. A true price of meat was calculated by different groups, and it shows that a higher price for environmental cost is needed for 30 to 50%. Here you can see it again. So compared to the supermarket prices, it should go up. Some supermarkets in Germany already present the true price on the shelves of food products in the supermarket, showing that cheese but also meat will become more expensive if we would pay the price, for instance, for greenhouse gas emissions. We calculated what would be the effect of a tax on meat, for instance on beef products in the Netherlands, and it will lead to a reduction of 50% of consumption by 2030 if prices go up steadily, like we also do it with taxing energy with CO2 taxes. So this is the proposal. So consumers pay extra tax on meat in the supermarket or in food services, and the government collects the money and uses the revenue to pay farmers to reduce emissions, and also uses the revenues to reduce food prices for healthy food products and compensate low-income groups. This is how it could look like more in detail. So you see on the right side on the bottom that on average meat will become 41% more expensive. And here you can see what can be done with the revenues, like subsidies for farmers, because they need more money to pay to produce in a more environmental friendly way, and also healthy food products have to be priced very lower and subsidized. So the effect of this tax shift is huge. In the Netherlands, it could lead to 4 megaton CO2 reduction. This is the effect of eating less meat, and in addition to this, subsidies, climate subsidies for farmers can add 2 to 3 megaton CO2 emission extra. At EU level, 3% of all greenhouse gas emissions could be reduced by having this tax on meat. There are already different countries who implement or prepare such taxes. For instance, the EU Commission published the Farm to Fork strategy in 2020. This is about the Green Deal for food products, and it said that environmental costs should be part of the food prices and the fiscal systems in the EU. They proposed a 0% VAT rate on vegetables and fruits, and this is already implemented at the EU level, that this is now possible. So countries like the Netherlands and Germany are planning to implement it. Last year, 18th of October, the EU Parliament voted in majority for high VAT rates for products like meat. And also countries like Germany and the Netherlands are preparing proposals for a levy on meat and dairy. Maybe you know that in our country, the Netherlands, there are farmer protests now because the government is planning to reduce livestock numbers by 30%. But in the same time, we can support farmers when they reduce their livestock numbers and pay them extra money to compensate their income loss. So that's also why a tax on meat is now developed in the Netherlands. New Zealand announced a tax on meat on dairy and sheep farmers by 2025 to include them in their emission trading scheme for greenhouse gas emissions. And Denmark also proposed a CO2 tax on all sectors, including agriculture. So our proposals are really taken serious, and they are, of course, also needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I want to take your attention for two reports which can be read by countries who consider pricing of meat and dairy products. One report was commissioned by Greenpeace Germany and studied by Eco Institute, and it showed that if countries would implement the proposals we do to have a zero VAT rate, so no tax on vegetables and fruits, but also on products like bread and grains, and in the same time have a high VAT rate on meat and dairy, then consumers will be a net benefiter of 50 euros per year per person. And we all know that food prices are very high at this moment, so reducing prices overall in a way that also would make healthy and sustainable products more cheap is a very good thing for politicians to do right now. Another report is from Chatham House called Changing Climate, Changing Diets. And this gives a lot of recommendations and pathways for countries if they want to lower meat consumption levels. This is a website where you can see that last year over 5,000 NGOs and companies in over 100 countries signed an open letter to 50 presidents of countries who eat most meat. And they also asked to start carbon pricing of food products, starting with meat and dairy. So we sent this letter to all the presidents and their ministers of environment and finance and agriculture. Here you can see the list of countries, the 50 countries who eat most meat in the world, and USA is on top of it, and then followed by Australia, Argentina, New Zealand, Brazil, Spain. So they are the real contributors to one of our most pressing problems in the world right now, which is climate change and biodiversity loss. There's also another option we have. We developed together with other organizations and with input from different countries and the EU Commission a new COP27 climate agreement on food and farming. This is a commitment by countries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from food systems 30% by 2030. It can be signed by countries, but also by states, provinces of over 10 million inhabitants, but also food and retail companies. So please have a look at climateagreementfoodfarming.org, and here you can support or sign this. So also non-state actors like NGOs and companies and others can support it. The goal of this agreement is 30% reduction of emissions compared to 2020 levels. And this is, of course, needed to help the Paris Climate Agreement goals. So what do countries have to do if they sign it? They can choose three options. They can only reduce their agriculture greenhouse gas emissions 30% by 2030, or they can reduce the food-related greenhouse gas emissions, the per capita numbers, 30% by 2030. Or they can do both. And we also ask them to do is, from a list of policy options, pick just 2 options for food-related greenhouse gas emission policies and 2 options for agriculture, reducing greenhouse gas emissions at farm level. Those measures have to be put in place by the end of 2025. And another commitment would be that countries will update their policies in the website I just showed, and in their national determined contributions. So we all can see what they will do to realize their commitments. So who can sign? All countries, of course. And we analyzed already the policies of 9 countries and also for the EU. And we found that a lot of countries already comply with our proposals. So these are the countries that could sign. And so we hope that in the coming weeks and months and the coming year, more and more countries will really sign up to it. And maybe in the next COP, we have a list of 100 countries signing it. Signing is very easy. You just can fill in a form. If you're a country or a company or another organization, there's another form. You were advised to tell about it and spread the word. So maybe now I have an option for people in the audience to have any questions to me about why this could be a good option and what can we do to convince politicians and participants here in the COP27 conference this is a good thing to do. Is there anyone who has a question? Yes?
Well, thank you very much for the brilliant conversation. In Africa, where there is already food shortage, how do we come into this light? Because there is already food shortage and tons of people already starving, you know, and the fact that in the next 10 years we are likely to even face worse. How are we able to reduce emissions on agriculture? Thank you.
Yes. So the question was, if I understand it right, that how to reduce emissions at farm level in African countries, and you're from Nigeria, right? Yes, that's a very good question. I think the proposals I just did were especially for high-income countries with overconsumption levels of meat and dairy. So we don't ask a tax on meat in countries in Africa where there's already very low levels of meat consumption. But I think on the other hand, in Africa, of course, there are also options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from farm levels. I think the way livestock is held can be improved by maybe better animal feed or shift towards organic ways of farming, carbon sequestration, It could also be like in other countries to eat less meat, because I think some people in Nigeria would also eat a lot of meat, and shift from beef to chicken meat, which is 7 times better in terms of greenhouse gas emissions per kilogram. So there are a lot of options also in other countries, and eating more plant-based diets. That's really helpful, and it's also very healthy. Is there maybe another question, or? Yes.
Hi, thank you
Hi.
so much for a lovely presentation and a great concept. I was just curious to know why, I mean, I think you've gone with a consumption first tax rather than a production tax. And is there scope for a production-based tax? Because I think in India, like while we're a very predominantly vegetarian country, we do supply a lot, and it's low welfare, it's high in emissions, and you know, we sometimes have, like, I think 5 years ago we rivaled Brazil in our beef exports. So is there an angle of like exports that we want to take into account when we think about taxes, and is that the future of like you know, taxation beyond just consumption? Thank you.
Yes, so you asked about exports of meat products even from India to other countries? I didn't know about that. Really? Oh, my God. Yes. Yes, I think it's really important that also countries use their import and export tax systems to also reduce meat consumption and reduce meat exports. We were planning a study on this topic, but it's not yet ready. But I think that, for instance, the EU could be one of the organizations that start higher import taxes from meat. Maybe also based on climate criteria, because beef, for instance, from Brazil has a very high climate footprint compared to beef from other countries. So this could be a criteria to make a distinction or make a shift in a different tax rate. And maybe export taxes could also be applied, that countries like India try to not export too much beef to other countries and make it a higher price, and it leads to more income also for India when exports of meat products are taxed. Thank you very much for this question. Maybe there's another question in the audience. If not, then I conclude this presentation, and I really like to thank you, and we can give the floor to the next speakers. I see a lot of Indians from South America standing there already. So welcome, the floor is yours. Bye-bye.